So, got all the bolts into the Y bridge. Not totally happy with the way it's sitting there. I had to pry it over in order to get this thing in there. So, plan is, big dead blow hammer. Just going to tap on this thing a bit and try to jiggle it into place. And get everything to relax because, like I say, this gasket was holding here. I had to pry this thing over to get these two bolts in. This side here, the same thing. So, just going to try to... And possibly what it should have had was some lube on the O-rings. Might have helped. Should have put some of that engine lube on there, but figured I'd just jiggle it into place, make sure it settles all the way in so I don't end up with a boost leak down there at the bottom of the gasket because it wasn't seated all the way down. So figured I'd tap on it a bit, try to get her into place good, and then I'll tighten up the bolts and go from there. So I want it to settle right to the bottom of the valley there, or of the V. So yeah, doing that, figure that should help it to set all the way in there because the bolts have quite a bit of slop in them there. So I probably should have videoed it, but after tapping on this Y bridge, before tapping on the Y bridge, I had tightened these things by hand, just you know, on the end of the socket, tighten them as much as I could, just turning on the socket. And after tapping it down into place, I got a good round of more turn out of those things too. So definitely a worthwhile thing to do. I wouldn't just stick it in there and tighten the bolts. It definitely moved down and gave me a lot more movement on these bolts as everything moves into place. So it kind of sucks itself down in the valley, and now the bolts are just there holding it so it can't move. They're not trying to pull it down. So definitely worthwhile doing. If you're putting a Y bridge in, I would tap on it. Get a rubber hammer. Don't hit it too hard, but you know, seat everything nice and firm. Here's my mechanic. Oops, my fireman mechanic. Running the magnet and the ratchet. Fixing everything. Right, fireman mechanic?
Yeah!
You're fixing everything? There you go. So as everything goes together, get this here on there, but there was nothing in this hole prior, so just found a bolt, stuck it in there to hold this hose in. If a guy was doing like an aftermarket intake Y bridge and intake pipe, then I would turn this hose over here. You could where are we at? You could loosen this here, turn it and run it down along the engine, and then you could cut this 90 off. Oops. Cut this 90 off and stick it right in there. It would save you a whole bunch of pipe and let this all look nice and low. But since I'm running the stock intake horn and stuff in order to keep the grid heater, I figured I'd just leave it like this. So that's what I'm doing there. Over on this side, I noticed that I had these wires actually running wrong, so they were underneath this thing. So I just pulled this bracket off. There's one number 10 there, a couple of 13s there. Stuck the wire into the right side of it and stuff to get it moved this way enough to where it's going to stick back in its hole. I think it was pinned right here. Where this Christmas tree was at. Christmas tree is kind of in rough shape, but I'll stick it in there and I'll cable tie it down so it doesn't pull on anything. But that way this here is long enough to reach, so I've got to grease up these plugs yet, plug that in. And then the green one over here goes to the grid heater. Then this bracket over here used to have the fuel filter in the way. So it's a 2.5 inch spacing. I'm just going to get a piece of tubing for each of those and put a piece of tubing in there. We'll give it a little bit of support. Over here, this also went on the bracket. I think I'm just going to take my zip cut and cut this off because by the time I get this tight, this dip to stick tube will be as solid as it needs to be. So that's how I'm going to do that. Keep going. Just about to pull these wiring harness, these wires back up here and start plugging in the glow plug controller in the over here. Got these things mounted. Took some 1/2 inch stainless tubing. And it's just swedge lock tubing, or tubing for a swedge lock fitting. Fit over them bolts just perfectly. So 2.5 inches long. Spacered that out. Dipsticks mounted up here where it was before. Got these plugs greased and plugged in. So that's your grid heater and the throttle plate over here. Had the mounting tab here for the, of course it won't focus. It ran over here to the fuel filter thing and mounted on to the fuel filter to give this thing some more stability, but I mean, you got to really pull it to get it to move at all, so that'll be just fine sitting there just like that. So we'll leave that like that because I'm not putting that other bracket in. That's the whole fuel filter has to go in for that bottom bracket to go in there. Got Mr. Miet right here. Say hi, Miet. Say hi to the party. He's out chilling, relaxing. Got him a nice bed. Then we got the fireman helper, still here helping. Or fireman mechanic helper, sorry.
Because I'm helping Jelaine.
No, you're helping Jelaine. Okay. Power steering pump's on. Put this bracket on. I know I took it off earlier before the cab was off, but I'll put it on there. Torque 37 foot-pounds. There, down there, and then the two there. If it's in the way, I'll just pull it out again later. Yeah, over here. Oh, the one I wanted to show you. The alternator wire. It does not go in with the rest of this harness, so it's on a separate wire. Comes right off the side right here. It attaches over here. Attaches to the alternator, and it's just basically the one wire that runs all the way here. It's got this plug in. Runs along here, and then it's got these two wires for the air conditioner pump. So for some goofy reason it's not in this main big harness. I'm not sure why. To me it would make more sense to be there, but they didn't. So anyway, that comes off the side here. Yeah, so I got this all tied back up against the side. Ready to get the tractor back here and put the cab back on. The other side, put the intake tube back in, the V-band clamp again. You have to bend that thing wide open, like spread it into a great big C shape to get it around, and then just slowly roll it around in place till you get her that way. You're going to want that nut facing upward, the way I got that. And then it's not too bad to get the intake tube in there. And PCV is in there, the inside of this. If it'll focus here in the dark. I just washed that out with some gas and a parts washer, so it's nice and clean. Once the cab's back on, I'll put the resonator back on. It's just not that important, so and it's pretty easy to do later. Yeah, got stuff hanging up here. Is the so this wire here goes into the cold side air intake, so right before it goes into the grid heater. This one here is your mass air sensor, goes by the air cleaner. Then there's one more over here, low coolant. So this wire comes up along, this cable runs down there from the other side. And it comes up here, splits off, goes to the back to all the emissions plugs. It's a little bit tempting to just chop the whole thing off, but anyway, got the downpipe off, took it to the welding shop, and they're supposed to weld that bung in for me for the EGT probe, so just got someone picking that up, so that'll be back on here before the cab goes on, but we're about to the point of being ready for the cab to go on. But as far as this here goes, this whole big space where this EGR was, leaves us with a lot of room there for working with coolant hoses. And this here is the one part, this bypass thing. I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do all with this, because really they run this thing for a whole bunch of different little hoses. This one here I believe is just supposed to make a loop and go back like this into the heater, and then there's a little vent there to let the air out. And this one here runs to the front and goes over, but it's not going to be able to go there. It's going to have to go down like this and straight across there. And then the cool, you can just barely see it there, but yeah, it goes over there by the thermostat housing to tie in there, so that blocks everything off. We'll do that after, because there's lots of room here. Once the cab's back on and we've got the heater hoses in our hand there, we'll figure out how we're going to do that. To me, it would just make more sense. Gotta try and figure out exactly what they're doing though, because if we run this hose to the heater that's bypassing the block heater, this is on the cold side of the thermostat. I don't really want that fluid bypassing and going to my radiator. So before it would go through the EGR and then go to the radiator. Oh, it looks like it's going in the bottom side. Never mind, so it's going on the bottom side there anyway. But I might just end up capping this off instead of hooking this up, and then just do something else on the other end and make it decent. We'll see how that goes, but I'll do that after I get the cab on, because it's pretty easy to work with.